Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. I have no financial conflicts to disclose. For anyone who has not been to the States and to the NIH, this is the outside of our clinical center, our hospital. Today, I'm going to be reviewing some historical information about disclosure to children, about their diagnosis and prognosis. I'm going to describe the development of an adolescent and young adult planning document, and I'm going to be addressing barriers to integrating pediatric palliative care and advanced care planning into clinical practice. I will then be providing some recommendations to be able to increase end-of-life communication and to be able to talk about courageous conversations. Let's start with some history. Before the 1970s, there was tremendous secrecy surrounding a cancer diagnosis and prognosis. In fact, researchers believed that until the age of 10, seriously ill children weren't aware of what was happening to them, and they didn't experience anxiety about death. This began with very seminal studies in the 1970s. The first one by Eugenia Wechsler, who looked at 4 groups of hospitalized children and found that total anxiety scores of the children with fatal illness were twice as high as those of other hospitalized children. And in projective testing, in pictures like the one I just showed you, they discussed loneliness, separation, and death much more frequently than the other children in the hospital. The next seminal study was done by Dr. Myra Bluebont-Langner, The Private Worlds of Dying Children, where she looked at children with leukemia a little bit younger in the inpatient setting. And what she showed was that children come to know that they are dying, but they conceal this from their parents and from the staff. Why? They want to protect them from their anxiety that they already have. And the families and the staff do the same, trying to protect the child. And she coined this maintenance of mutual pretense. By the mid-1970s, it was no longer an issue of whether to tell or not to tell, but rather how to tell, when to tell, and who should be doing the telling. By the 1980s, there was a combination chemotherapies which offered so much more hope, and children were surviving. And then additional studies were done that showed a high percentage of the survivors, their parents, and their siblings felt that the cancer diagnosis should be shared with the child early on. But what about prognosis? What do children with limited experience in living understand about death? Well, we can learn a lot by listening to their fears. Fear about being alone or separated. I had one young man whose mother told him, "You'll be going to heaven." And he said, "But can you come with me?" Fear of being replaced or forgotten. Are you going to give my brother my room? Who's going to get my toys? Are you going to forget about me? Will you remember me? Worried that the parents will never be able to recover emotionally. "Mom, you cry all the time. What are you going to do if I'm not here?" Talking with children about common fears is not likely to increase, but rather to decrease distress. In fact, lack of communication leads to increased anxiety, mistrust, and isolation. And when it comes to decision-making and end-of-life discussions, many organizations recommend that involving youth in decisions regarding their care as they are emotionally and developmentally ready is critically important. Yet we know that discussing end-of-life is one of the most difficult aspects of care. The majority of families want to have advanced care planning conversations and to be able to have their child participate in the decisions. But very few children living with a chronic illness even have an advance directive. One study found that it was only 4%. We know that adolescents and young adults have very specific preferences of what's most important to them, and they view a lack of information as a major barrier for being included in these decisions. And we also know that there have been very few formal documents or programs or resources available for either pediatrics or adolescent and young adults living with this serious illness. And those that are available were informed by adult experiences. In a recent study, 1/4 of adolescents and young adults express regret about treatment decisions. And I'm always concerned about caregiver decisional regret, especially after a child dies. This is a very well-known study that was in the New England Journal of Medicine, but it's still quoted today because this was a survey of 429 parents in Sweden who lost a child to cancer. And none of the 147 parents who talked to their child about death regretted it. Yet, 27% who did not talk to their child about death regretted not having done so. Now, you may say, but then 73% didn't regret the decision, but I worry about that 27%. And so we did a follow-up study, and we looked at parents who lost a child to cancer between 6 months and 25 years of age. And 72% of these parents endorsed regret, and 25% endorsed unfinished business. Both regret and unfinished business were associated with prolonged grief symptoms. And what were most of the regrets about? Treatment decisions. And what was the most common unfinished business? Not having a discussion with their child about death. We learn from children that they think about these issues so much. Here is a mandala that was done in a clinical setting with a patient who had just found out that they had relapsed. And what you will see over here is the kind of questions that they have, especially when people are not talking to them about it. Will I live long enough to go to high school, college, or get married? When will I start getting sick again? What will happen to me tomorrow? When will there be a cure? What will it feel like to no longer exist? When will I die? When children have other children that they get to know in the hospital who have the same illness that they have and they die, they worry even more. This is a picture of me and my friends in heaven. So much attention was to that wall symbolizing who's not talking to me, what is beyond that wall. And then a classic drawing of a child who had been in the ICU multiple times and wondered, where do I belong? And that's what he named this picture. I began this work a long time ago when I had a very precocious 11-year-old who was helping me to develop a workbook for children who had chronic illness. And each time I saw a child, I would ask them, tell me what a good page would be. And one day she said, my mock will. And I said, really? Tell me about that. And she looked at me and put her hands on her hips and she said, you adults think you're the only ones who think about who they want to have their stuff? So the mock will it was. And it became one of the most important pages in this workbook. We had 10,000 copies that were distributed very quickly, and we now have a new version that is publicly available. But the question really was, would an advanced care planning tool even be appropriate for youth? We didn't know. So we opened a study which has had 4 different phases, which I will take you quickly through. This is going faster, which began with focus groups. We had 20 participants and we asked them, do you think this would be useful to be able to have a document that is created by and for people your age? And then we had 20 additional participants who we asked them to critically review a document that's available called 5 Wishes, which I'll show you in a minute, that was actually developed for people 65 and older. And we added those additional questions that we learned about in the focus group. Could this be helpful to you? Is it appropriate to ask about these issues? And how stressful would it be for you to be able to complete this? We also asked the participants to say which wish within the booklet was most important, what could be most helpful, what should be taken out, and what should we add. If you hadn't seen 5 Wishes, this is what it looks like. There could be a check mark, but most of the pages you will see look more like this, where you cross out anything that doesn't resonate with you or you don't agree with. And what did we find with the first cohort? Everyone felt that an end-of-life planning document that was created by and for people their age would be appropriate. 90% felt it would be helpful for themselves, and 95% thought it would be helpful for other people their age who are living with a similar chronic illness. But what we learned is what they felt was missing. Where I want to be if the end of my life is near. The people I want to be able to have with me. The clothes I would want to wear at my funeral. I know my mom is just going to put me in that fancy suit and shiny black shoes, and all I want is my baseball cap. The friends and family who would want to be able to attend a service. The people I don't want to attend a service. Specific music or readings that I would like. The people to have some of my belongings that are most important to me. And how I want to be remembered by my family, especially on my birthday and on special holidays. Thanksgiving, and love Thanksgiving, and I want to be able to make sure that sweet potato pie is still there. On Christmas, still put up a stocking with my name on it because I don't want to be forgotten. And maybe, I'm sorry, these are just going faster than me. Maybe you could be able to give things to another person who is really in need. And I want to have a place where I could be able to write letters. What was missing from the document that we had originally looked at? The developmental milestones. And when we think about the 3 I's of adolescence, identity, independence, and intimacy, death is the ultimate challenge to each of these processes. The loss of identity, the demise of independence, and the potential end to intimacy. So the next phase of the study began. We created a new document that took into account both family and peer relationships and a need for intimacy and independent decision-making. We called it My Thoughts, My Wishes, My Voice. And we then compared this document to the 5 wishes with 52 new participants who critically reviewed the documents and told us what they liked and what they would want it to look like. Over and over again, what we heard was the same themes coming up: the importance of identity, meaning, family, friends, spirituality, control, and being remembered. These are the key developmental issues. And from that, we went back to our original focus groups. We went to the literature, our clinical experience, the first phase of the study, the second phase of the study, and we created a new document called Voicing My Choices. That's a place where you could say what makes you feel supported, a place where you could write what decisions bring you peace, a place where you could choose what provides you the most comfort, and a place to voice your thoughts and needs. We also developed a way to introduce each page of the document. For example, on a page of how I want to be comforted. When you don't feel well, what tends to bring you the most comfort? Do you like the room dark? Do you tend to want to listen to music? What about when you're in pain? Here is a page where you could document what's most important to you. For decision-making, such a hard page to consider. We ask, how does decision-making for your medical needs happen now? Are you comfortable with the way decisions are being made? Has it ever been hard for you to voice what you might want or not want, or to have your opinion heard? What I would want from my friends and family, what I want them to know about me. Many people your age have told us that sometimes they really worry more about their family members than they're worrying about what's happening to them right now. Has this ever been the case for you? What about, is there someone you would want to say something to but not sure how, like something that somebody did was really cool and very special, but you never told them so? Or someone that you may want to say, I'm sorry, or accept their forgiveness? Again, this is a page where you can do that. Voicing My Choices came out at the very end of 2012, and we never anticipated the global impact that it would have. In fact, it ended up on the front page of the Sunday New York Times. And people would say to me, you must be so glad that you're having such an impact. But in reality, it made me worried. And why did it make me worried? Because I was having requests from people in their 30s that didn't want a document that was created for people 65 and older. They wanted something for them. And because I never studied voicing my choices in the same way we studied the earlier iterations of the documents, I didn't know if it helped with communication with friends and family members and healthcare providers. I didn't know if it would increase anxiety or decrease anxiety, help with social support, acceptance of illness. So we developed a study to answer those questions, to be able to determine the perceived helpfulness of voicing my choices. We enrolled participants ages 18 to 39 that were living with cancer or another chronic illness, and they completed the baseline measures, looking at anxiety, social support, acceptance of illness, and communication with their family members, friends, and healthcare providers. And then they critically reviewed each page of the document. And then they completed several pages, a minimum of 3 pages. And we followed up with them 1 month later. And we asked them, did you share the document with anyone? And if they did, we asked if we could speak to that person. And if they didn't, we asked them why not, so we could better understand the barriers associated with having these courageous conversations. And they completed the same measures again. We opened the study in 7 different U.S. sites. And what we found 1 month later was of the close to 150 participants who completed the document, that about half of them had not previously discussed wishes, their preferences with a family member. But 1 month later, 65% of those did. The majority had not previously discussed their preferences with a healthcare provider, and unfortunately, very few did after 1 month. And what we found mostly was that they felt that there wasn't enough time, which is very fair, it was only 1 month. Or what they heard more often is that this is not a conversation that I should bring up with my provider. Rather, it is a conversation that my provider should bring up with me. And while we did not find any changes in acceptance of illness or changes in social support, what we did find is that anxiety around advanced care planning decreased significantly right after they reviewed the document and again 1 month later. We were pleased to be able to see that over 90% reported that the document was helpful, but they did suggest changes to the document. And so our original document looked like this for types of life support treatment I'd want, but it had 2 options if you were close to death. This didn't resonate with most of the participants. What they wanted is an option in case that they were going to survive their illness. So now we have the first option scenario is if treatments can help me or I could survive my illness and whether I would want to have life support treatment. The second scenario provides situations such as if they were going to be close to death or they would not have brain activity, what they would want. But there's now a third scenario. And in that third scenario, if they chose they wanted everything done, they wanted full support, but they weren't getting any better, that they had an option to be able to have those people who they chose to speak for them to be able to reevaluate their goals of care. We also knew that having information about some of the life support measures was very overwhelming. And so what they wanted to be able to do instead is have a hierarchy of the types of life support, things that they could resonate with, like blood transfusion and antibiotics. So some other changes that were made. I want to be honored as in addition to being remembered. And we have a page now that asks about social media and passwords and fertility preservation and what you would want to happen to that. And some of our adolescents and young adults actually had children of their own, and they're very, very concerned about them. And so now we have a page about what I want for my children, both if I become too sick to care for them and also after my death. Many people wanted to be able to write letters to their loved ones, but weren't sure, how do I even begin? That is so difficult. I wouldn't know the first thing to say. And so now we provide prompts for people to be able to write these letters, which they find very helpful. So the next phase of the study is looking at these revisions and comparing them to the original document. Our aims is to be able to make sure we have the very best document. So we enrolled 65 new participants at 4 additional sites where the adolescents and young adults critically review both versions of the document, the original and the adapted one. And what we found is almost all of them prefer the newer document. And they gave us reasons why they would prefer the newer document. So now we're in the process of making a further adaptation that will then become available again to the public. But we also asked, did you find reviewing Voicing My Choices helpful in thinking about your own care? And you'll see that 95% endorse this. And the same for, would you use Voicing My Choices for your own care? And again, 95% would. This was very reassuring for us. But I want to say that Voicing My Choices is only one way to have some of these courageous conversations. There are a number of other kinds of tools that you can consider to use in your own practice. One of them is My Wishes, which was developed not by research, but by clinicians for very young children. This too is available through Aging with Dignity. The workbook that we created that I spoke about a little bit earlier, This Is My World, is another option where they could be able to describe a safe place for them. They could be able to put their worries in a bag. Or again, they could be able to let the world know what it is that's most important to them. And this booklet also has My Mock Will. Jenga. If you've ever played Jenga, this is a very safe and fun way to be able to understand the inner world of children and to open up conversations. And here you put whatever questions you want on the block. So as each block is removed, you can have an opportunity to answer the question and have a conversation. There are therapeutic games like Shop Talk, where you have 10 different stores, each a therapeutic store. And if you want to answer a question in each of the store, you then get a present from that store. And the first person to get to all 10 stores and fill their very adorable shopping bag with their gifts wins. But conversations are so meaningful. It identifies coping skills, self-esteem, family stresses, anxiety, depression, and understanding of prognosis. You could use this in an individual or a group or a family session. And there are different versions for children, for sibling, and for parents. It's available in English, Spanish, Italian, and now in Czech. So this could be available for you as well. There are family communication tools. Hear Our Voice is a workbook for family members, but Alberta Health Services created a card, I would say game, but it's really not a game, where they have cards on meaning, people, feelings, body, and tougher thoughts. And each person in the family picks up a card and answers one of the questions where everyone has a chance to talk about. What I really like about this is that if people want to stop, there's a card to say stop. If you want to say, this is important, I want you to hear that, then they could put up that card. If they want to think about it for later, they just put up the card, ask me later. Bibliotherapy is another very powerful means to be able to open up important and very courageous conversations. We did a review of many, many books that are out there, looking for a book that is appropriate for children who may not survive their illness. And we only found 5. And the best of that was the one that we found was in French, called Vlčkových. And so in response, my colleague, Dr. Megan Weaver, and myself wrote a new book called The Gift of Gerbert's Feathers. There are online resources for parents, grandparents, caregivers, siblings, and teachers. There's a coloring page, and the Czech version now has actual stickers of feathers that they could be able to use. And we have prompts of how to be able to use this book to get conversation started. We also have a page where you could be able to start the book and just instructions of how to make this the most meaningful conversation and experience for the child. There's a card game called My Gift of Grace, and also known as Hello, which we learned is also now has a Czech version. It's a conversation guide. I recommend this really for more older adolescents or young adults than for younger teens, where people can go around, answer questions, write them down, and share their responses, and then they get a chip as part of answering their question. You'll see in different cities, you'll see boards up for like Before I Die. These conversations are happening, and they're really, really important. So here people could do, their bucket list of things that they would want to be able to do, whether it is to go visit a place or to be able to figure out life or to be able to, be more spiritual. But whatever that may be, here's an opportunity. You could be able to work with people and say, what would be on your bucket list? Even Facebook has a legacy contact now, which is really important to be able to see for social media purposes. So moving forward, how do we address these barriers to having these really courageous conversations? We know the concept of palliative care, the science of lessening physical, psychosocial, emotional, and existential suffering is understood, but healthcare providers have been very slow in implementing these recommendations. So I'm going to just turn us over to 3 different strategies to consider: education, the response to the word palliative, and timing. Let's start with education. The majority of healthcare providers lack formal education in palliative and end-of-life care. We know this. Even though that we know that those who have formal training are more confident and feel more successful in treating children with complex symptoms. Very few pediatric oncology fellowship programs even require a rotation in pediatric palliative care. We truly believe that education in pediatric palliative care concepts should begin during residency, but it's not just didactic kind of experiences. People need mentors with experience in palliative care to talk to them and walk them through this. The very good news here is that there's been a rapid expansion of pediatric hospice and palliative care programs, and HPM is an official board-certified medical subspecialty. Let's turn to perception. Does it matter what you call it? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes. Changes in terminology, such as not using the word palliative care, but using the words like supportive care, has led to increase in earlier referrals in several different studies. Even places like St. Jude will call it division of quality of life and palliative care. There was an interesting study that was done by the American Childhood Cancer Organization where they asked caregivers, 244 of them, what they understand about the term palliative care. And they gave comfort care that is provided during the child's last few days or weeks of life when curative treatment is no longer possible is one possible definition. And 45% of the parents felt that that's what palliative care was. But when they gave them a new definition, pediatric palliative care is something that focuses on providing relief from symptoms, pain, and stress for the child and his or her family as an extra layer of support with the goal to improve quality of life. What they found is that 73% were very likely to be able to want to use palliative care for their child during their child's treatment. So I think about timing and misconception. Palliative care shouldn't be an on or off switch. It is something that should be introduced simultaneously along with curative treatment, a continuum, that it has a role at every aspect of the treatment and the cancer trajectory. And if you take anything away from this talk today, it is that you're going to hear over and over again from some providers, it's just too early to have this conversation. But it is always too soon until it's too late, and then you've lost that opportunity. So let's go ahead and look at recommendations. The Institute of Medicine, which is now the National Academy of Science, proposes a life cycle model. A life cycle model which advanced care planning occurs at key developmental milestones across the diagnosis of a life-limiting illness, something that can be revisited periodically, that becomes more specific as changing healthcare status warrants. So can we just take the word D out of advanced and just do care, advance planning in advance before it is too late? How to approach advanced care planning? Well, think about developing a systematic approach so that your families don't feel like one person is offered something and somebody else is not. A standardized message that this is something that's very important to the children and the families that we care for. And consider a team approach. Sometimes these conversations are best introduced by a member of the team that really knows the family and has familiarity with their needs. When is the next question that often comes up? Identify time points at which a family's wishes and goals are discussed. It may be when treatment begins, to be able to say, we've learned from experience that it's important to be able to look at some difficult issues right now, even though we have all expectations and hopes that your child will do well. Or it could be, you may say it relapse. Or another really important time is perhaps right before transplant. Just remember, prognosis is not necessary to initiate the discussion, and remind your families that communicating about palliative care concepts does not reflect a loss of hope. In fact, just try to emphasize that this means that we just really respect your preferences for care and what's most important to you. And standards. We need standards. And I'm really proud to be able to say that standards of care, evidence-based psychosocial standards of care, are now available for children with cancer and their family members. This is a project that took place in the United States where 15 evidence-based standards are available that began with a beautiful young boy by the name of Matthew Brown, who had very aggressive osteosarcoma and didn't live for very long. But after his death, his parents wanted to be able to make sure that psychosocial care is provided for all children with cancer. And a very long process took place since that began as a congressional symposia and then ended in publication in 2015 with 16 papers by 66 authors and with some of the most downloaded papers for over 5 years in the journal Pediatric Blood and Cancer. For today, I'm just going to focus on the palliative and end-of-life standard. And this standard, the bar is low so that all sites can be able to use this, where youth and their families should be introduced to palliative care concepts to reduce suffering throughout the disease process, regardless of disease status, where Dr. Weaver is the first author. At the time, there were 36 studies to support the standard. We're going to need to update these standards, and I can promise you there are many more evidence-based papers out right now to support this standard. But we also learned from studies that followed the publication of the standards that there are many barriers. Number one, pediatric oncologists believe they already provide adequate palliative care. Barrier two, patient's disease is too advanced at this point to benefit significantly from a referral. And barrier three, that pediatric oncologists are unaware of the potential benefits and the scope of pediatric palliative care. So in summary, how do we integrate these pediatric palliative care and these courageous conversations into the care that we provide for children and families and teens and young adults? Think about an inclusive approach. If you have a palliative care service, try to integrate them into the existing care, really having the attention to symptom management and goals, quality of life, and think about extending these beyond the hospital if they're back in the community or at home. Refer your patients to the palliative care service to be able to say, I want to make sure your child gets the very best care possible. I don't want to leave any stone unturned. If your child had a really bad toothache, would you worry if I was referring you over to the dentist? If your child has a new heart murmur, would you question me if I was referring you over to the cardiologist? Well, I want your child to have the very best care for symptom control so they have less of a chance of having post-traumatic symptoms and that they have the best care and they suffer as little as possible. to remember always that these conversations are intimate and very caring, and these intimate and caring conversations builds trust, hope, and really good relationships. And adapt a team approach. People question, well, who should be providing this care? Let me promise you that there's plenty of work for everyone, and we are better together. People say, well, where do you want the field to be in 5 years from now? And I am not the only one to be able to say this. We would all love to be able to see these palliative care slides look the same as those Kaplan-Meier curves with better predictive models. But really, at the same time, we really want to make sure that we don't lose sight of what's most important: the people, the relationships, and the need to confront very difficult conversations with courage and compassion. I think of this as the Wizard of Oz approach. It takes brains like the scarecrow, courage like the lion, and compassion like the Tin Man. So who is responsible for doing this work? The best answer is a resounding us. And this collective us benefits from early preparation, formal training, and empowered partnership. Thank you so much for listening.